Has this ever happened to you? You're playing a normal Crucible match, and somebody on the enemy team just keeps deleting you with a bow and hand cannon, and no matter what weapons you use, you can never quite kill them fast enough. You look online, but no one seems to be talking about this type of stuff happening, so you take matters into your own hands. You try and copy that build, but there are so many different hand cannons and bows to choose from, so you don't know what to use? Well, worry no more, because I have the video for you. Now, before we delve any deeper into the dark arts of bow swapping, I want to go over a few basic things. 1. For simplicity's sake, I will only be considering hand cannons for the swap. They offer excellent damage and range, and they have quite good handling if you get a good roll. 2. I think bow swapping works best on Hunter, partially because I genuinely like abusing Oathkeepers, and partially because of Dragon Shadow. Warlocks, you at least have a Phidian aspect. Titans, you have Antius wards. Dune Marchers, it's up to you. 3. Here are all the weapons I will be using during the course of this video. Pause and look at any of the rolls you're curious about, but just know that a decent chunk of these are not actually perfect rolls because I didn't have perfect rolls kept in my inventory for this. I had to scrounge up what I had in order to make this video idea work. I don't have a bunch of god rolled 180s and 140s sitting around everywhere. So here are the tiers I will be ranking the bow swap builds in, and I hope the names are self-explanatory. Also, I will be using charts like this one to display the required resilience to survive a specific combo. If a number is on the board, then you need that resilience to save you, or more. If there's an X, you need something more to survive, like damage resistance or an overshield. Also, don't be confused if you have never seen all of these orbs appearing after you kill people. It was for a seasonal event in the summer. I recorded this gameplay during Solstice, and I've been working on getting this video out ever since, and it's taken me a couple months, and so don't be surprised. So let's start at the bottom. So on paper, Trinity 120 doesn't look all that bad. The real trouble with Trinity doesn't lie in its raw damage per se, but in the consistency. Trinity's problem comes from the fact that you shoot out 3 projectiles for damage instead of 1. This caps out your effective range far sooner than almost all other bows on this list. This also removes effective hipfire from the bow, as not aiming down sights lets the arrows split much faster. Now for the swap. My steady hand roll used to be good, but quick draw by itself no longer feels as compelling on its own, especially on a 120 with such low handling. This means that when you miss the slightest bit with Trinity, the cleanup is as slow as it possibly gets because you have the slowest moving hand cannon and the slowest firing hand cannon, besides Erianna's. So I do not recommend this build, even with a better 120. So on to the next build. Lightweight Sturm has a subpar look on paper. I've only ever killed people with a crit body if I was charged with light, or if there was some chip damage. Literally no one uses 1 or no resilience. It doesn't happen. So that leaves this build with needing to hit 2 crits in order to kill anyone without help, and in order to do that, you have to use the lightweight and switch to Sturm in time. Now, when I came up with the list of weapons I was going to test out, I included Sturm as what I thought would be a stand-in for an average 120. If it truly is just an average 120, then please do not use it to bow swap with the lightweight. Even with the insane boost to handling the catalyst gives, it feels like pulling your gun out of a swamp. Also, the lightweight bow doesn't help much either. Lightweights in general have much lower accuracy than precision frames. They hit for far less, and pairing it with a weapon that isn't quick on its feet doesn't feel like a legitimate threat, regardless of your aim. So let's look at what I think rounds out the builds that are an active detriment to your team. Now on paper, this build looks solid. 3 kill scenarios? Most builds above it on this list would never dream of such power. There's a catch. You have to use Whispering Slab or some sunset kinetic lightweight bow. During this video, I'm going to repeatedly say that lightweight bows are a waste of time to pair for bow swapping, so if you're one of the 2 people I've ever seen using one in Crucible, I hope you can forgive me. But really, God, they suck. Each and every lightweight feels like pure garbage. And pairing the worst type of bow with the least flexible, most demanding hand cannon in the game, the hand cannon that takes special ammo? No. This combo feels horrid to use. It is truly hard to find a build that feels worse to use than lightweight Erianna's. Now onto the builds I just can't bring myself to recommend. This build is, on this chart, identical to Trinity 120. Now you might claim that 2 crit 1 body from Trinity works better with 120s than 140s, but that never happens due to the way Trinity's arrows split. They split horizontal, you don't hit body shots if you're hitting headshots either. They're all crit, or like 1 crit and 2 misses, or 2 crits, 1 miss, and you don't hit both. However, there are 2 crucial differences that give 140s the edge over 120s. 140s have more handling, and they fire faster. Not only are you switching to your hand cannon faster after firing your bow, but your follow-up shots when you inevitably don't kill anyone with your first shot are much faster. But don't mistake these benefits for praise, because it still feels pretty bad. Mainly because of Trinity. Now for the next entry on this tier list. I couldn't just pick one. So Ticuu's, where do I begin? On paper, it looks like any old lightweight. Where it differs is that you can't even use quick access sling. It has no extra perk that's just a bare bones lightweight. Well, if it isn't worse than a lightweight, and lightweights are so bad, then why isn't Ticuu's an active detriment to the team? This is where the exotic perk comes into play. The way you play with Ticuu's normally really does mirror the bow swap. You start out with a tracking hipfire that almost always hits, and then you need to aim down sights and land a crit to kill anyone. So when talking about bow swapping with Ticuu's, I'd recommend simply using Ticuu's by itself and using it as its own bow swap. And I think that bow swap is just sort of below average. The final entry in the I guess but why tier. Now on paper, this is identical to lightweight Sturm, which we already discussed. However, legendary 120s have the chance to roll with useful perks for the bow swap build, so I think a properly rolled combo is almost serviceable. Even with perfect rolls, I still have major problems with the combination of a weak bow with a slow hand cannon. Lightweights, even with consistency perks, just don't feel like they consistently get crits. When you're stuck with having to live long enough to shoot your 120 twice, at least twice, most people won't let you live that long. So I simply can't really call this build average. Now onto the average builds. The actually average begins with on paper, this looks abysmal. The only way to kill anyone is to hit both crits. Plus the lightweight bow is bad for hitting crits, plus 140s have lower range than 120s, so you lose out on that too. So why use the 140 over 120 with a lightweight bow? Well, it comes down to the name. 140 simply fires the second shot off a decent bit faster than 120. While the gap between shots 1 and 2 for 120 often spell death, a 140 can squeak by just in time in a lot more scenarios. Also, most 140s handle better than almost all 120s. So this build does what a bow swap should, better than all the builds I've already rated in this video, but it still only feels average. The bow holds it back far more than the hand cannon. Therefore, it sits way down at the bottom end of average, like a C-. Now for the next average loadout. This build looks decent on paper. For the most part, people don't run 7 or higher resilience, so it usually operates like a faster version of Trinity 140 with less range. However, due to the fact that you are using a 180, it fires up a follow-up shot faster than a 140. Not to rehash how god-awful Trinity is for bow swapping, let's focus on how a 180 performs in this type of build. The handling feels much closer to 140s than 120s, though you may need a swapping perk like Quick Draw or Surplus to get it to actually move fast. The big downside is that you lose a lot of the range and stopping power that the slower firing hand cannons have. The only real way to mitigate this is to just not bow swap at longer ranges. Simply shoot another bow shot. Or just spam your 180 and hope it does enough damage like I do. So what's next? Now I know what you're thinking. There isn't even an X on that chart. Why is this not at the bottom of this trash list? Well, as I said earlier, most people aren't running 7 or higher resilience, so you can actually kill a decent chunk of people with only 2 shots. If you land them. Also, lightweights can use quick access sling and they have consistency perks, unlike Trinity. However, this build is significantly capped in the range department. 180s have low range and lightweights have low range and accuracy. This build requires constant good positioning or else you will be picked apart by people that choose good range options. Also, you can't get too close to people because if you slip up even a little bit, a shotgun or a fusion rifle can close the distance and get rid of you for the mistake of using a lightweight bow. This build has insane potential, probably on par with some of the best builds I will talk about in this video, but the demand on the player is just a bit too unrealistic to call it anything better than average. And for the final average build, we have the first precision build lands solidly at the top of actually average. It has a perfectly respectable damage chart, and it doesn't feel anywhere near as limiting in the range department as lightweight 180s do. However, this build does still have some downsides. I'm not really going to criticize this build because of the bow, because I usually think that precisions constitute one of the best class of bows for Crucible. The problem lies in the use of Sturm. For all the handling the catalyst adds, it still feels pretty sluggish compared to a god-rolled 120. Also, because Sturm is a bland average 120 that happens to be an exotic, you can't even use an exotic heavy to offset the slaying potential you miss out on waiting for Sturm to finally ready itself in your hand. While it does have, as a build, more range than everything I've listed before, this build is only average. So finally onto the good stuff. First up is now, on paper, this is a perfectly acceptable build. The amount of people running 9 or 10 resilience is minuscule compared to the amount of people that don't. So it almost always works that a crit followed by a body shot, and the range is a kill. So we know that 180s are somewhat fast and have low range, but how about Wishender? Well, it truly is a double-edged sword. The slight damage buff over a typical precision bow, along with the generous wall hack, are offset by this being the slowest bow besides Leviathan's Breath. The wall hacks are nice, don't get me wrong, but I'm just too spoiled by snappy bows. Now if they ever add a catalyst to Wishender that adds Surplus, or Quick Draw, or a snapshot, then my tune would change in an instant. Until then, I still feel like the range restrictions of 180s will keep this build from being anything more than just somewhat good. For our next build we have Now, this build looks solid on paper, but it does suffer the same problem all other 180 builds have suffered before it. The range sucks. However, Lem does work to negate this more than Wishender. Instead of just tacking on 1 to 8 more damage than a normal precision, Lemon adds a whopping 21. It hits like a truck. Any damage boost, and it'll kill any resilience off of a crit. Also, if anyone happens to have some chip damage put in, Lemon will clean up better than most any other weapon in the game. Due to how wonderful Lem is as a bow, it truly carries the 180 better than Wishender. What rounds out this tier of mediocrity? Why, it's none other than... Alright, I know what it looks like. No, I didn't make an intermediate tier to put all the extra 180 bow swaps in because I think they're worse. They just are worse than all the good ones. I didn't even realize I'd put them all in their own tier until I started writing the script for this video. Now onto the build itself. So wall hacks and extra damage over time are worse actually? Well, they're just really unnecessary. Instead of getting either of those two things, you get quick access sling, consistency perks on your bow, and you can use your exotic slot in the heavy on something like, I don't know, Heir Apparent? The builds in this tier are really just hard capped by the 180s. Those fast-firing hand cannons help the consistency of bow swapping when the bow itself is bad, but when the bows are actually pulling their weight, 180s simply can't compete with other hand cannons. Their lackluster range and damage just leave a lot to be desired once your bow can start to hit people more than like 10 feet in front of you. On to the pretty good builds then, and first up we have... On paper, this build looks like a bunch of the builds much earlier on this list. However, the bow here is Wishender. It has much better characteristics than a lightweight, unless you consider draw time or handling, but you get free wall hacks if you just don't want to move very fast. So now that Wish isn't being dragged down by a low range 180, how does this build feel to use? Wish is still as sluggish as ever, but now you can actually sit further back and still kill people with a snappy 140. It takes everything Wish 180 does, but does them much better at longer ranges. You can actually duel with this loadout compared to its 180 counterpart. The only things holding this build back and pretty good are the energy 140s I have access to in Wishender's handling. The palindrome I used for my energy 140 in this list works pretty well, but I think a better roll would make me genuinely like this loadout more. So up next we have So on paper this is ever so slightly worse than Wishender 140. So why is it rated higher? Well, this build has access to Kinetic 140. At the time I was doing the gameplay portion of this list, I had not gotten a Time Lost Fatebringer, but if I had, it would 100% have been used in this video. But also, my Dire Promise is insanely good, much better than my Palindrome. A small trade-off in bow damage for much better handling and a much better hand cannon, yes, I will take that over the limited wall hacks of Wishender any day. So why isn't this the best build? Well, it just lacks stopping power overall. Precision's hit for the lowest amount out of all the bows left to cover, and 140s also do the least amount of damage in terms of all of the hand cannons left to cover. So yeah, this build is pretty good. Now, on to the next build. On paper, this build is nothing special. However, where this build excels at is doing everything a normal bow swap should. Back when I first discovered bow swapping was a thing, I nicknamed this build the clean build, because everything it has is its own. There are no exotics, just a good bow and a fast-drawing hand cannon. My preferred loadout is Biting Winds and Igneous Hammer, but that is because I have a surplus Snapshot Biting Winds and an adept Quick Draw Snapshot Igneous. If you want to get good at using a bow swap but you don't want any of the excesses of the other builds, I suggest using this one. It's simple, reliable, and it has pretty good range. All around one of my personal favorites, even though I'm not rating it too highly. So what is the last build that didn't make it into Goated? Oh, this hurts my soul to put this build here. Just look at that chart. Oh, it's so good. This build asks for surprisingly little from the user. Them feels really good and snappy, but if you have a good roll in your steady hand, you'll feel the magic of this build. Its range is one of the best, and the stopping power is incredible. So if it's so good, then why is it only in pretty good? Well, the only reason I'm singing the praises of this build is because Quick Draw used to be ridiculous. The steady hand I have had forever was Quick Draw and Iron Grip, so it used to be sufficient to run the bow swap. With Quick Draw nerfed, it does feel sluggish, and I find that you really have to take your time now with this build. When you have what feels like a full second of draw time done with, this build can work, but you might not get that many chances with how fast the build works nowadays, at least for me. If I were to suggest a steady hand rule, it would be Quick Draw Snapshot, or if you use the True Prophecy Opening Shot Elemental Capacitor, which are sold on week 1 of Season of the Lost, so if you got one, give it a try. Alright, it's time to get to the real builds, the ones I actually think are worth using over all the other loadouts. This build is rocking the 2 X's, 2 zeros that we've come to expect. So why does this rank up here in the Goated tier? Well, it comes down to the hand cannon. Using my perfect Igneous, Wishender allows you to push for quite a lot more than with just a normal precision. Why? Because for all the dismissal I've given Wishender before, it turns out that wall hacks are actually pretty nice when you have the range to properly use them. Literally the only downside of this build is that Wishender moves slow. That's it. If there was a catalyst and it just made Wishender move, then it'd be insane. Due to the wall hacks Wishender gives, you can get a pretty nice ratio of crits to body shots. With the range of 120s, even during damage fall-off, you can snipe people from really far away. Now sure, Wishender may draw slower than all other normal bows, but that is a drawback you can work to mitigate. With careful positioning and some caution with peeking and Oathkeepers, you can almost always have Wishender drawn or about to be drawn before you engage with anyone. Next up, another cracked build. So on paper, this build is better than most. There is one dimension that is left out of this chart, and that is how long it takes to get the kills. With Lem 140, it does take a while with the body crit to kill. However, if you cut your teeth with a more average build, the kills you get from these less accurate shots feel like a nice bonus rather than people just running 6 or more resilience. Which some people do though, not so many that these extra kills would be rare, but it does happen, so don't expect it all the time. Before I started using all the different bow swap builds for this video, I couldn't have imagined using a 140 with Lem over 120 and finding it better. But here I am. The dire promise I have just has too much range. Opening shot and rangefinder allow it to reach super far, and along with its incredible handling, they allow it to perform flawlessly as a companion to Lem. Now, Zur did also sell a good dire roll with snapshot and rangefinder, and I would like to try that out in the future to see if the extra handling helps over the range boost of opening shot. Also, Time Lost Shapebringer does in fact work really well with Lem. Its also payload lets it reach out pretty far for a 140, and you can get some rolls with ridiculous handling to swap just as fast as Dire. This is what I thought the pinnacle of bow swapping looked like when I picked up this build after the quick draw nerf torched my Lem 120, but there is some room for improvement. Dire and Fatebringer don't have the same range as 120s, and 120s work better with damage fall off. So let's go and see what's left.
Someday,
Hey, does anyone remember what we have left? Oh my god. It's beautiful. With first glance active, any combination kills. You just have to land 2 shots somewhere on target. This build has the best stopping power out of any on this list. The range is unbeaten, but there's 2 major downsides. One, Arianna's uses special ammo, so you have to run a 4-cost hand cannon scav on your legs in order to have any ammo. And 2, Arianna's takes some time getting used to over other hand cannons. While this build does have some drawbacks, there's a reason almost everyone that comments about bow swapping recommends Fighting Winds Arianna's. It just is extremely powerful and easy on the aiming requirement. Another minor problem this build has is that in order to keep the body shot kill going, you have to space out your Arianna shots so that first glance can activate again. Once you get the feeling for how long it takes to refresh, which I think is like 1.5 to 2 seconds, it isn't that bad, but it is there. Would I recommend this build to someone just picking up bow swapping? It does have a bit of a steeper learning curve than the other swaps because of the restricted ammo, but it does offer unparalleled ease of use once you learn how to aim with it. Also, farming for a good Fighting Winds is easier than getting literally anything else for bow swapping that isn't sold by Xur, so I can't not recommend it. If you have any roles for a different goated build, I would advocate for that over Precision Arianna's due to the bad habits it will give you. But if you try out a different bow swap first and then switch, it will feel better than only ever knowing the greatness that is this build. So there's still one build left to talk about, so let's uncover it. This build is back on this list for 2 reasons. One, I have been working on this video since well before the quick draw nerf, and I had them all rated, and I had the gameplay, and then the nerf came, and I redid the list and ratings in accordance with how they play now, but I also rated everything before it got nerfed, and I tried having both of them on the list at the same time, and then a few months went by, and I don't think anyone really cares how it used to be. So then why include it besides it being a relic for how long I've been working on this project? It just didn't sit right with me to put them 120 in pretty good. I know how good the build can be, and it doesn't belong that low. It's the reason I even got into hand cannon bow swapping in the first place. Back when Beyond Light dropped, I was very unhappy with myself in the Crucible, and I really didn't enjoy spending any amount of time in there. And then on the first week of Iron Banner during Season of the Hunt, I got a quick draw Iron Grip steady hand. I had been using Lem in the Crucible pretty consistently ever since Black Armory, and with the buffs they had recently given to 120s in mind, I decided to pair them together and see what it felt like. And I never looked back. It revitalized my desire to hop back in the Crucible. The more I practiced, the more consistent the bow swap felt, and my shots became more accurate. And it really felt like my dedication to the build was being rewarded. So I kept using it, mainly on my hunter, but also on my other characters for months and months. Almost a year went by and I racked up 9,000 Crucible kills on that steady hand, making it my most used Crucible gun by far, and my 3rd most lethal gun overall, only behind Recluse and Mountaintop. I absolutely loved this build, and I used it everywhere. In Control, in Trials, in Comp, in Iron Banner, in Clash, in Momentum Control. Then they nerfed Quick Draw. While all of my friends had access to a Quick Draw snapshot steady hand, I had never been fortunate enough to get one. Overnight, the spark was gone, but I know there's hope out there. If I could just get my hands on a Godroll steady hand, I bet I could make it work just as well, if not better, than Precision Arianna's. But after a year of turning in Iron Banner tokens, I still didn't have one for recording the gameplay for this video, so all I could do is tell you that if you have that role, please give it a shot. It'll be fun, I promise. So, thanks for watching. I hope you learned something about this extremely niche build type that I don't see a whole lot of resources on. I learned quite a lot personally, and I'm actually very happy I did this for no other reason than I got to use a bunch of wacky builds in the Crucible for a purpose other than winning. It was really refreshing. Most people that talk about bow swapping only talk about how good biting wins Erianna's is. While I do agree that it is top tier, there's a whole world of builds out there that are fun and enjoyable, and sometimes good. Maybe one of the other builds fits your playstyle or movement better, or maybe you like Wishender more than I do, or maybe you're cracked with Trinity and you can hit crits with it like no other. All I can say is, try it out, and to those that do, I wish you good luck.